Non-Japanese people living in Japan. What is the downside about living in Japan no one talks about? Story 1. I work with Japanese businesses. And the thing that infuriates me the most, nobody will disagree with you in a meeting. Even if you're wildly wrong and about to make a huge mistake. Even if ITLL wreck their business. Even if it's an objectively terrible idea. If you have a meeting coming up with 30 people in it, you need to have at least 30 one-on-ones ahead of time in order to get everyone's true thoughts. And you cannot mention any other one-on-ones if you say, oh, I met with Bob and he said XYZ. Then you've missed out on getting any kind of real opinion out of the person you're meeting with. They will shut down. Terrified of disagreement. Story 2. Japan doesn't protect a lot of basic civil rights very well. You can be discriminated against for disabilities in employment and even in healthcare choices. If you end up in a lawsuit, the court is extremely reluctant to make a judgment and will try to force an agreement even when the case should be clearly in favor of one side. If you're charged with a crime, you'll be convicted, but not all crimes are charged. So if you're the victim of a crime and the police and prosecutor don't want to take the case to court for fear of being in the tiny percentage that aren't convicted, the perpetrator will go free. Story 3. I've lived in Japan for 12 years and counting. Deep relationships are hard to come by. People don't often ask inquisitive questions for the sake of protecting someone's privacy. A big negative of that is most relationships are very surface level. In addition to this, people usually don't hang out at each other's houses. All gatherings and meetings must be planned well in advance, and things feel more like events rather than casual get-togethers. Ultimately, the lack of deep connections where you really get to know people is hard. People are so good at putting on an outward face and covering up their true selves. Story 4. My buddy is Vietnamese and grew up in Southern California, then moved to Japan for work. He always felt SoCal was a little racist, but it was nothing like Japan. In Japan, Vietnamese are often uneducated immigrant workers, and are seen as the lowest class. My buddy's Japanese wasn't amazing, it was his third language. And he dressed like a California skater. He would be refused service at restaurants, not allowed into stores, and called boat trash. He eventually learned to dress in expensive suits and only speak English, playing up his Americanness. He still had an old woman ask, who taught a dummy like you English? Story 5. It is so futuristic in a way but also so behind to anything bureaucratic or anything relating to paperwork. No online system, no chance to go in person, just mail, and God forbid you mail to the wrong person or even the department, they will mail back to do it again with the right addresses. It can be maddening. Story 6. There's this lady on TikTok that does a video series about what it's like being a foreigner in Japan. She's a teacher and she had gotten a summer job at one point. Apparently they made her apologize for leaving and tried to force her to stay, and apparently some companies will try to sabotage your next job. Also, there's an issue with women living on the first floor of apartment buildings. If it's regional or not, but dryers are not something that she had access to, so they hang dry their laundry, and the landlord warned her about young men stealing panties from her little patio if she was living on the first floor. Story 7. Most of the stuff is talked about a lot, so ridiculous work culture that emphasizes appearance of effort over results, normalize cheating. I remember someone at work whose wife would only give him enough cash to buy lunch so he wouldn't spend money in strip clubs. He ate cheap instant ramen to create his own secret fund and go see prostitutes. Being on the receiving end of xenophobia and racism is a new experience for Caucasian, Byzantine trash collection rules. Story 8. 1. I'm 63. I smack my head on doorways and those train bars at least once a day. Always check entryways got clearance. 2. Taking off your shoes to enter office buildings and schools and having to carry around an extra pair of footwear because your feet are too big to fit the provided slippers. 3. Going to the dentist. They often will take multiple sessions to fix one tooth, and sometimes the work is less than quality. 4. Deer in the headlights look Japanese get when interacting with you because you might be the only foreigner they've ever seen. It honestly must be what being a celebrity is like, without the being rich part. I had a bunch of high school girls pretend to take an English class so they could sneak my picture and run out of the school giggling. 5. Japanese are hard to read by body language. I prided myself on being able to read people. That went out the window in Japan. They could literally be burning with the fires of with a hatred of you and you'd never know. Similarly, they might like you and ignore you until the day you leave they got you a present. 6. Upsetting wa. As a big loud American, I thoroughly rupture the wa of my environment. 7. Gaslighting on the internet. See a video of Japanese going up the stairs in an orderly fashion on Reddit and every comment is Japanese are so orderly and polite. When in reality if you're going up the stairs during rush hour you better keep your head on a swivel as you will be body checked into Bolivia. 8. Polite doesn't mean nice. Once again, polite doesn't mean nice. Story 9. You need to use transparent trash bags and you need to take them out at 6 a.m. You're not allowed to take them out the evening before. You're not allowed to use trash can but disgusting transparent bags. And if you mess that up you'll need to have the trash bag inside your house waiting for you to get up early, and the schedule is all over the place. Disclaimer, not all Japan is the same, but it is a known issue. Story 10. The constant subtle exclusion gets to you after a while. Been here 6 years and still get the wow your chopstick skills are amazing. Comments, like yeah Karen I've been eating 3 meals a day here, I think I figured out how to hold 2 sticks together by now. Story 11. Not my story but a school friend of mine who was obsessed with Japan all his life basically achieved his dream and moved over there, married a Japanese woman and got a job with Bandai Namco. After 10 years he practically fled the country with his wife and had almost nothing but bad things to say. He says it's basically impossible to be truly accepted as a foreigner, the work culture is beyond insane, and the police and government have a frightening level of power. He highly recommends it as a holiday destination, but not to live. Story 12. Japan is a duality in so many ways, and if you live there for a while the more superficial layer starts to chip away and you start to see some interesting things. I really try to look at it as not better or worse, just different, but that can be really hard at times. Japanese people are generally very respectful, kind, welcoming, polite, and interested in other cultures. Traveling there is safe, and it's refreshing to be treated so well by default, but under the surface there's deeply ingrained misogyny, racism, and ageism. It doesn't necessarily manifest in day-to-day interactions, but stay there long enough and you'll see its impact. For example, it's important in Japan for tea to be served to guests, but it doesn't matter how much authority a woman has if she's the only woman around she prepares the tea. I visited a company for work where the department head was a woman and her employees were all men. She prepared the tea. The only time a man served me tea was when there were literally no women around, then it was the youngest man's job. Racism usually manifests as genuine curiosity, and if you look different you can feel like a movie star. You'll hear constant surprise that you can use chopsticks or speak a word of Japanese, but that's pretty innocuous, if tiresome, but try to get a driver's license, open a bank account, get a job, or buy a car and you'll see the rampant systemic racism in action. Westerners also love the extremely punctual and efficient public transportation, perfect queuing, polite customer service, and general quietness in public spaces. But all of that comes from extremely rigid social standards. You'll do a perfect job at work to make sure the trains are always on time. You will queue respectfully, you will be quiet. They have a saying that the nail that sticks up will be hammered down. Conformity to the group is mandatory, and if you wish to deviate you have to do it in the accepted spaces. It results in bonkers artwork, wild after-work parties, crazy culture, etc., because when they're allowed to let loose they absolutely do. But it's very different from Western culture and can be a difficult trade-off. There's a lot more stuff like that, a kind of utopian surface that visitors tend to appreciate, built on top of difficult or even dark concessions of freedom for the individual. The importance of personal freedom and liberty in all areas of life is what I grew to appreciate about America after living there for a long time. I still struggle with those trade-offs. For example, the US is so focused on individual liberty that we're basically fine with frequent massacres of our children, and the grocery store is an absolute main character syndrome nightmare. I wish we could find a middle ground of mutual respect but also a fundamental importance of individual freedom. Story 13. I lived in rural Japan for a year as an assistant language teacher, a downside nobody talks about. How about not treating road sidewalks in winter? I didn't have a car, and relied on getting around by bike and on foot. The first time it started melting and refreezing, it was a total shit show. Everything was covered in a half-inch of ice. I fell a lot despite being Minnesotan. When I was in Sapporo one time, I took a taxi and was making small talk with the driver about how the roads were so icy. He assured me it was totally safe, and immediately after that as he tried to stop at a red light he wildly fishtailed back and forth due to the ice. We both laughed about it. Seriously though, for a country with so many elderly folks who could easily break a bone in a fall, I don't understand the logic behind this. Bonus fun facts: in small towns, folks are much more likely to smile, wave, and say hi. Nearly everyone, including at work, was also very accepting of my forearm tattoo. Story 14. Simple rule of thumbs: anyone that talk about how Japan is a perfect country tourist. Anyone that talk about how Japan is a miserable country and complain all day long, the one who just start to realize that Japan is not a perfect Sugoi kawaii utopia country. Anyone that can talk about the good, the bad and being realist about Japan and Japanese long-term resident, that you actually should listen. Story 15. That in many aspects where the Japanese seem way ahead of other countries, it's because they are comically behind everyone else in some aspect. Japan did not have the credit card culture North America and Europe have, so that's the reason Japanese cell phones got tap to pay in the late 90s. Those phones were linked to something like a PayPal account that had to be manually topped up, in cash, at a convenience store, so not as easy as it looked. The lack of credit cards also often meant paying in cash. Japanese people wanting first-class airline tickets thought nothing of going to a bank, withdrawing 15,000 in cash, and taking it to the nearest JL office to buy tickets in person, rather than online. Faxing may still live on in Japan, and if it's dead, it's somewhat recent. It was also common for Japanese bosses to look at every fax that came in, so no making fun of your boss via fax. I know their IT is generally way behind the US. A few years ago it wasn't uncommon to see Windows 98 in offices still. Story 16. My wife is Japanese. We don't live there but we go often and stay with her family in Fukui for a month or so a year. Here are my picks. 1. The really bizarre tradition about not complimenting other people's children for being cute. It's not a politeness or protection thing, but one of vanity. Everyone thinks everyone else's kids are ugly. I get made fun of for calling a kid cute. Even old women don't share pictures of their grandchildren with each other. 2. Zero physical affection towards your own children. No hugs, nothing. I have to refrain from hugging my own kid when they're 3. The cheating. Like 2 of my wife's 30 close friends are loyal to their husbands. Lawsuits for cheating spouses are a thing in Japan, which has a good number of my wife's friends either paying or receiving claims for adultery, for everything being covered in plastic despite draconian trash rules. 5. Women who have been raped or abused by their spouses still live with the in-laws despite their husband being prosecuted for it. 6 ineffective waxy or plastic napkins. Story 17. Something that does come up but I feel like most people don't internalize is just how xenophobic Japanese natives are. As a culture they never really left behind the "we are beacons of civilization, and everyone else are barbarians" mindset. Story 18. The underlying racism. If you speak Japanese as a foreign, that's great. If you're mixed race, part of which is Japanese, and speak Japanese, that is not cool for some. The Japanese word for someone of mixed Japanese heritage is half. Also, the underlying misogyny is pretty outrageous. Story 19. I like Japan, but there's some drawbacks. Japanese people are insanely racist. Way too many rules. These people love rules. The Japanese justice and civil tort system is insanely draconian and dysfunctional. Their houses are very small. Their salaries are very low compared to a high cost of living. The yen is weak. The fertility crisis continues to degrade their economy. It's the oldest country in the world, so the dating scene wouldn't be great. Their English skills are pretty poor overall. Earthquakes. Story 20. The dating scene here is rough if you're a foreign woman. Lots of guys either fetishize you or are intimidated by you. After 3 years I've pretty much given up and focused on my career instead. Story 21. Coming here when you aren't young can leave you with few friend options outside of other foreigners. People 30 already have little time for their close friend group and aren't really looking to add new faces to the group. On top of that, most foreigners don't stick around long, so Japanese people are hesitant to invest time into building any sort of meaningful friendship with you, so you try to make friends with other foreigners, but lo and behold, what those Japanese people were afraid of was right, and your foreigner friends leave one by one. If you are not an extremely outgoing person, you can find yourself fairly isolated rather quickly. Story 22. I lived in Tokyo for a year. While I was learning Japanese, English is my primary language and I needed a translator for many business interactions. While my employees mostly spoke English to some degree, very few others do. Taxi drivers, train conductors, some hotel receptionists spoke very little English. I used to have colleagues write out the address to hand to the taxi driver or hotel reception. I eventually learned enough Japanese to be polite, but never fluent. I was very happy when my next assignment took me to Singapore, where almost everyone speak English well. I learned a great deal about how non-English speakers must feel trying to navigate the US, where everything, every sign, is only English. Story 23. Just a reminder, this was an Axis power that was infamous for being just as racist and sadistic to other ethnicities as Nazi Germany. During its imperialist era, however, unlike Germany, and unlike the US during its Jim Crow civil rights barbarism, Japan didn't face any forced need to self-reflect on their super dark past, none. The Japanese government refuses to ever acknowledge its war crimes, and a lot of the imperial soldiers, the ones who bayonet babies thrown in the air, used civilians as target practice, and lobbed off heads, they just simply came home and went back to being citizens. No repercussions or Nuremberg for those soldiers or the high command of Axis Japan. It's a known thing that Japan's education system doesn't teach about its past behavior during World War II and the 30s, but will always put to the forefront all the tremendous losses and sacrifices they made during the war, never any acknowledgement of the things they did. Look up Unit 731. It's because of this that a lot of Japanese citizens don't even know about the things like the rape of Nanking, or other similar atrocities like the Bataan Death March, committed by the Imperial Army, and when some are aware of these events, they don't believe in them. Point is, that's why things like very casual and acceptable racism, as well as mistreatment of their own citizens and kin, persist as norms in Japanese society. That is why the powers that be in Japan, whether it is the government or the private sector, don't view their citizens' lives and individuality to be an important thing. The same powers that be that printed in the newspapers the glorious death of 100 million. Look that up. Edit. Highly recommend Dan Carlin's 6-part podcast Supernova of the East about Japan's role in World War II. Story 24. I've lived in Japan for 4 years, working in a Japanese company. 2 answers. 1. Time zone is terrible. In summer, it's light before 4 a.m. and gets dark at 6 p.m. The whole country should move the clocks an hour back. 2. Reverse culture shock. When I go back to the UK, I sometimes catch myself thinking my friends and family are self-centered, loud, and can't read the air. By British standards they are absolutely none of these things. But Japan's emphasis on harmony and indirect communication has started rubbing off on me. Worried this could get worse the longer I stay. Story 25. There's a ton of inconveniences that are still in place because of a Scooby-Doo villain-level attack 30 years ago. Some of them are well-known: lack of trash cans, but the most annoying one for me is the lack of ventilation in bathrooms. If you sweat any more than a Japanese person, you will always come out of the bathroom looking like you just fought a mythical creature. Story 26. How judgmental people are, judging how people dress, how they talk, what they look like. I see personally, but man, it's so lame how much grown adults can't get out of a high school bully mindset. Story 27. As the saying goes, Japan has been living in the year 2000 since 1980. I watch a lot of old Japanese films, and it's so interesting, remarkable how little things have changed in terms of the societal aesthetic. Japanese have an incredible sense of beauty, but absolutely no sense of ugly. These aren't exactly downsides, but I was on a call with a recruiter yesterday who was shocked to hear how antiquated Japan is in terms of IT web designate. Story 28. Most landlords won't rent to foreigners. Most banks won't give you a credit card. Police can kidnap you for 2 weeks without having any proven charge and won't let you contact anyone. Yen has dropped and salaries are stagnant. Glass ceiling for foreigners getting promotions to upper levels. Story 29, the big one. If you weren't born in Japan and are 100 Japanese, then you will never be accepted. Foreign worker, okay. Foreign military, okay. Foreign student, okay. Casual traveler, okay. You'll mostly be treated cordially. But even if you have lived there for decades, speak the language fluently, know all the social nuance, you still will never be accepted as one of their own ever. Story 30, don't live there. But isn't the Japanese judicial system such that it would make a Cardassian proud? That is to say that the verdict is pretty much predetermined and the trial is just for show. Story 31, we went on honeymoon a few years ago. When we went to Kyoto, we did a tour of the Geico Quarter with an American who'd lived there for years. Really nice guy. He gave some interesting insight into living in Japan as a foreigner. 2 things stood out. He gets told on a daily basis you speak such good Japanese, which seems like a compliment until you realize it's actually a way of othering. The other thing was homosexuality is treated more as an offense against one's family, in that how will you provide the next generation? Apparently, there's an element of sure, you can have with other guys, but you better get married to a woman. Story 32, school kids spend all their time at school and don't get to spend much time with their dads. My barber in Japan had a young son. Once he was telling me how his son was about to start school and he was having his last camping trip with him. I asked him why he couldn't do that in school holidays. Apparently, kids go to school for 6 days of the week, and during the holidays they are expected to do school activities. He said his son would be tied up with school stuff until he graduated high school. Story 33, after reading the comments I am wondering why everyone romanticizes Japan. Edit, wow, didn't expect to get so many upvotes. Love you guys from Zimbabwe. Story 34, the slander and libel laws here are different. If you say something negative about someone in a public way, even if what you say is true, you can still be sued because their reputation could be damaged. It's Story 35, people think that Japanese people are so perfectly polite and respectful, then they learn Japanese. I've been in far more confrontations with Japanese people than I have with Americans, over the stupidest little. Mostly Japanese people, on average, are quite conservative, and they hold themselves and others to extremely high standards. Story 36, medical care here sucks. Long wait and doctors only see you for a little, barely diagnose you, and just give generic or placebo medicine. God forbid you have a serious illness. Feels like you're a burden to society and looked down upon. Seriously sick or need to see a doctor on the weekend. Too bad, they don't work on weekends. It up or just roll over and die. Story 37, Hanko stamps. God forbid you ever forget to bring that thing with you when visiting a bank, etc. Japan is either amazingly advanced in the 2090s, or ridiculously outdated and stuck in the 1890s. Flexibility is not a thing. Story 38, I don't live there, but traveled there on business over the years. In mail, but the way women are treated is way below men astounded me. It is an extremely society. As just one example, I was on an elevator with a Japanese male and 3 Japanese women. When it opened on the main floor, the Japanese male raced off and I stood waiting for the 3 women. They were so happy and thankful. They probably never had that happen before. Story 39, I worked for a company owned by Toyota. I found the Japanese to be extremely lazy, and racist not only towards me but my Chinese partners. I feel that pedophilia is ingrained a little too much in their culture. Story 40, I've been trying to gather what to list, and honestly there is just too much. But one thing for certain, over the past few years Japanese, even among other Japanese, tend to be more aggressive, especially towards foreigner, no matter if they are pregnant or not. If you got shoulder bumped whether on the streets or station, chance are it's 90 on purpose. Also, one of the misconception TikTokers make, that Japan is a safe country. It is for men. The amount of news of women getting stalked, killed, raped even on local bulletin board creeped me out. One of the misconception that tend to be popular is all Japanese cheat on each other. Most of the interview take place in central Japan and the target of the interview is bad boys girl, so of course you will get that kind of answer. Try this on other country as well and you'll see probably same answer. I've seen enough loyal Japanese that refuse to hurt their partner no matter the circumstances with my own eyes. Really, it's not one size fit all after all. Story 41, I lived in Japan for 2 years. I saw more miserable foreigners that lived there than not. You can never really integrate into the society as a non-native Japanese. Getting mortgages, loans, etc. is very hard. It's not just people's opinions against you, it's the actual system. Story 42, it's a conservative hellhole that looks cute and polite on the outside but is rotten on the inside. Those Redditors who praise Japan all the time, saying America should be more like Japan, they'd regret it if the social system actually got applied in America. It's all on the surface. Story 43, my sister-in-law moved to Japan in a heartbeat with his boyfriend because of how amazing everything was and how safe she felt there compared to living in America. It didn't take long before she realized the low crime rate was inversely proportional to the amount of creeps and offenders towards women children. Story 44, making a profile on a website to buy things like movie tickets or concert tickets. I work there 6 months a year, and sometimes navigating antiquated websites can be a huge pain. Filling out name blocks can be especially troublesome. List your name in hiragana and/or katakana, but make sure you use half-width characters. That's not right, use full-width characters. How to successfully use them without a knowledge of those systems. Good luck. Some websites absolutely refuse to accept my foreign visa cards as well. Pizza Hut is especially bad about this. Still an amazing country, but so much of life there is stuck 2 decades or more in the past. Story 45. From what I have heard from one of my friends who was there for a few years, you do not want to get in trouble there. Also, it looks all pretty and clean, unless you are in a smaller town. As a dude, you're more or less safe, as a girl, less so. Also, cops have a tendency to target foreigners well, not that it is somewhat unique, but they are quite open about why. And also lately Japan has a massive surge of anti-foreigner movements, many young support parties that want to enforce some new rules. So, yeah, to paraphrase Shakespeare, something is rotten in the country of Japan. I guess, like everywhere else except North Korea, nobody complains there. And a little addendum, do not listen to some rich YouTubers who are currently in Japan to praise it often blindly. Half of them are not living a normal life, often very, very secluded away from that little annoying thing called reality. But there is also plenty of good things that nobody talks about. Story 46. Junko Furuta. They let the men that tortured her for 41 days go. They get to live out their shitty little existence with a slap on the wrist. Them in Japan for that. They're too nice, meaning they're not honest. They won't say what's actually on their mind and everyone appears as a mindless drone. In actuality, they're just trying to survive while being taken advantage of by a system that rewards servitude, not personality. Story 47. From a friend of mine. If you're not obviously a tourist, authorities will always assume you're there illegally. He's lived there 30 years and is a legal permanent resident, but he still gets hassled by cops who want to see his papers. He tries to be graceful about it and use it as an opportunity to educate people that Japan is not nearly as ethnically homogeneous as they think. Story 48. I used to live there. The worst part of being a foreigner is that you can't blend in, you always stand out, and people always treat you like a foreigner no matter how good your Japanese is or much you follow society's rules. It's really hard to make real friends. Everyone keeps you at a distance. I was lucky in that I made a couple really good friends, but it can be really difficult. Also, people think they are being polite by complimenting you on how well you use chopsticks or speak Japanese. It gets really aggravating after a while. Also, I hated keeping like 5 bags of trash in my very small apartment waiting for specific trash days. Story 49. As a black woman, being fetishized. I joined dating apps when I first came here, and matched with many Japanese men. However, 80 of them were either 1 really into stereotypically black culture like hip-hop, reggae, soca, etc. 2 were generally rebellious, so they only dated black or non-Japanese girls because dating a black girl is the most rebellious thing one can do apparently. 3 really wanted to try a black woman once, so they were looking to just hook up. The messages upon matching were typically things like, "Are you aggressive in bed? I hear women from the Caribbean are really good in bed, can you twerk wine?" It was hard to distinguish who was like this because it was the most salaryman-looking guys who were the freaks. The worst, and the reason I stopped matching with Japanese men was one guy I went on a date with couldn't stop talking, on and on, about how he loves black culture, the women, and asked me a million questions about the Caribbean, specifically Carnival and soca. That's not the worst part. We went driving around the city and, every chance he got, he would try to touch my hair, and remark on how it was wild and sexy. I think if you exist in a space that is a little exotic but still in their comfort zone, e.g. I'm slim and not dark, but I have huge natural hair, so I'm still unambiguously black, Japanese men will fetishize you. It's hard to meet a partner here because it's either fetishizers or white guys who want to date Asian girls only. Story 50. No one has mentioned the fact that real estate prices keep rising in Tokyo, partly due to the fact that extremely wealthy Chinese are buying them up. There are full-on services that exclusively cater to these people, helping them from paperwork and bureaucracy to real estate to housework to cooking, and these people don't have to know a single word of Japanese. A lot of Chinese are trying to retire in Japan, and by using these services that mostly employ Chinese and staying exclusively in Chinese communities, they are creating enclaves and not immigrating to Japan. Story 51. Speaking as a half-Japanese person, there's way too many to get into, but there's way too many stupid rules and customs that are beaten into people's heads by both Japanese and foreigners, only for them to come here and immediately find Japanese people not following them. When Japanese people talk on the train it's whatever, but when foreigners do it, then they're noisy foreigners. Story 52. If you're not Japanese, and especially if you don't look Japanese, it doesn't matter how long you've lived here, how well you have conformed to the lifestyle, work life, culture, etc., you will always be an outsider, and will always be treated as such. Story 53. Labor laws and unions are kind of non-existent. I worked in the film industry, I had a day rate. In most countries, 1 day of work is 8 hours, but in Japan, your day rate is for 1 day, and as everyone knows the day is 24 hours long, so I go to a shoot for 30 hours non-stop with no sleep and be paid for 2 days. Story 54. The shame culture. Even for the most minuscule thing, the expectation to always read between the lines, or read the air, as they say, it's exhausting. If it weren't for the possibility of the war breaking out soon, I would have gotten out of here yesterday. Story 55. There's more than a few things they do that would be easy to classify as basically Nazi. If it was in another country, the police can hold you without charging you for 3 weeks. The judicial system has a proud history of tricking illiterate people into signing confessions for crimes they did not commit and are punishable by death, and there are trucks with loudspeakers where a friendly voice calls for the expulsion of foreigners. Story 56. Absolutely loved my few years living in Japan, but the downsides for me were, you will always be seen as and treated as a foreigner no matter how good your Japanese. This can be especially annoying when apartment hunting landlords often don't want to lease to non-Japanese. Bureaucracy is life. They love forms and fax machines and paperwork of all kinds. It works, but it can be very laborious and not always clear. The online world still feels very behind the times despite how modern Japan is in other ways. It's so hard to find basics information, and professional websites often look like 90s blogs. Didn't impact me, but I know their legal court police system tends to be less forgiving to foreigners. Story 57 may be too niche, but Japanese accounting standards do not match West, especially the handling of bad debts. For example, if a loan goes bad, in the US the bank must report it as an uncollectible loss promptly, but in Japan the loss is not declared until the bank arbitrarily decides it is uncollectible. During the real estate bubble in Japan, banks had hundreds of millions in loans on failed construction projects but never wrote them off to avoid making the financial statements look bad. No one should ever invest in Japanese company stocks. You literally have no idea what's going on and no recourse to find out. Story 58. Assault aka chikan is a massive issue, hence why there are women-only cars during peak rush hours and signs warning about it. If you get groped, it's considered making too much of a scene to speak out about it. In regards to women themselves, they're still lower on the social ladder compared to men. If you ever watch a variety show on Japanese TV, the guys are made to look cool and the girls made to be easily impressed by them. If you get pregnant, you're pressured to leave your job because it's still thought of a woman's role to be stay HME and take care of the kids. Bullying is also an issue in school, as the film A Silent Voice touches upon. There's a saying, a nail that sticks out gets hammered down, which makes those who don't fit in a target. Not me, but a friend of mine lived there for several years and would regularly post signs outside of various establishments which read "No white people." Turns out racism isn't frowned upon either. If you're not Japanese, you might think of living elsewhere. A lot of these comments confirm this. Story 59. I needed an address to get a phone number. I needed a phone number to rent an apartment. All the forms you have to fill, it's legitimately crazy. As a bonus point, making local friends feels genuinely impossible. Other foreign friends are fine, but the local folk generally aren't fond of socializing outside of their circles. Bonus point because I think it's the same as long as you're a foreigner in any country. Story 60. This thread is so interesting. I went to Japan last year and found it to have been extremely overhyped by everyone, especially Western media. The Japan is already living in 2050 was such a lie, and this thread kinda confirms it my feelings. Japan is stuck in the future. We imaged the 2000 would be like back in the 70s or 80s, and they haven't quite managed to move into our actual future. Story 61. Damn, Japan sounds like a nightmare. From what I've read in these replies, I'm getting the impression that Japan is lonely and terrifying. No wonder none of them are having babies. Conclusions I'm drawing from y'all's experiences. Cops and judges don't prosecute most crimes because they refuse to risk ever losing a case. If you're changed for a crime, you're automatically convicted. No one has real relationships because everything has to stay surface level and no one spends time with each other. Everyone lies constantly and refuses to make open decisions because disagreeing is too difficult for them. Discrimination of all kinds is encouraged. And they eat way too much fish. No one said this one, I just hate seafood. Story 62. If you are a bit on the big and tall size, it's very difficult to be physically comfortable almost anywhere. Seats are tiny and hard, counters are low, and there always seems to be a shelf or something below every tabletop or bar counter that you're going to crack your knees into. Also, you can almost completely forget about buying clothes. This one hurts because I've seen some really cool shirts and shoes that I'd love to buy, but they just don't make them big enough.